Now entering Islam. It's part of RELS 100 Western religions. One of the great sayings from the Quran is it demonstrates the intimacy that Islam has as part of its reflection on God, its theology. It says this from the Quran, chapter 50, verse 16. And we have already created man, and we know what his soul whispers to him, and we are closer to him than his jugular vein. So a quick question. Said the word Islam already. I also say the word Muslim. What comes to mind immediately? And you don't have to report this to anybody, but be honest, because many messages in the media are negative about Islam. And part of this class, part of this particular section of the class is to help undo some of those negative stereotypes and to help us understand a religion that is such a big part of our world. Philip Novak in The World's Wisdom says this about Islam, and this goes back to the question of what is a religion, and do the entities or the things we are studying, do they think of themselves as religion? Here's what Novak writes. Islam does not think of itself as a religion, if by that word we mean a set of beliefs and actions sealed off from the rest of worldly business. Rather, Islam sees itself as an all-embracing way of life. So yet, once again, we come to this problem that the things that what we're studying, the objects of study, don't see themselves as necessarily a religion. So here's just some important words. A Muslim is it's a noun. It is a practitioner of Islam, or of pertaining to the religion of or civilization of Islam. That's actually an adjective. So it can be a Muslim person or a Muslim. And note that Muslims see, again, Islam as a way of life, not exactly as a religion. Allah is the Arabic word for God. So a Christian who is Arabic speaking, or a Muslim, or an Arabic speaking person of any kind who wants to refer to the one God would use the word Allah. So it's not really proper to think about this as the proper noun, Allah, as it were, for the word for God. So Allah is formed by joining the definite article al, meaning the, with ilah, God. So literally, Allah means the God, not a God. There is only one, the God, as Houston Smith writes in The World's Religions. And this is that radical monotheism of Islam. So whereas we saw Christianity as a Trinitarianism, their form of monotheism, and Judaism has a form of monotheism, which sometimes allows God to be called, they, or part of the heavenly host or whatever. Some argue that in early Judaism there was henotheism, the worship of one God among many. One of the things about Islam is, at least at its core, there is this radical monotheism. And as I said before, this is just to repeat, the Arabic word for God is Allah. And if Christians who are Arabic speaking would refer to God, they would call the deity Allah. The story of Islam, Daniel Brown writes in a new introduction to Islam, begins in the Arabian Peninsula. And the great puzzle of early Islamic history is the sheer unlikeliness of its beginnings. A thoughtful Arab living in Mecca a short time before the rise of Islam would have had every reason to laugh out loud at the suggestion that Arabs would soon be world rulers, representatives of a new universal faith, and purveyors of a vibrant civilization. So this is the incongruity, the contingency of history. We cannot understand history somehow as a necessary thing, but it's a contingent thing. It's based on some unusual experiences that happen because of people and places, and in some ways something that's unpredictable that comes together. So Islam is often seen as Arabic, but most Muslims are non-Arabic. And by Arabic, I mean those who speak the Arabic language. In fact, the highest percentage of Muslims in one country, or put another way, the country with the highest percentage of Muslims is in fact Indonesia, with approximately 88% of the population, which of course is not Arabic speaking. So let's look at the demographics. You can see the size of Christianity and Islam in this graph. The two biggest religions in the world, the third being Hinduism, and then just that small slice, which is Judaism, which is, of course, our other monotheistic religion we're studying. So Islam is a religion of about 1.8 billion people, which is close to 1/4 of the world's population. About 1 in 4 people in this world call themselves a Muslim. And which is fascinating because, you think about this is the youngest religion that we are studying, as we'll see. And it is yet expanding rapidly. And by 2050, some people believe it will be bigger than Christianity. So again, a Muslim is a practitioner of Islam. And I've already highlighted some of these things. Muslims see Islam as a way of life, not exactly as a religion. And Allah, we've covered that already. So Islam started in the Arabian Peninsula. You can see the map on the screen. What is largely now Saudi Arabia. And it was principally through this one man, Muhammad. So his dates traditionally are 570 to 632 of the Common Era. So, at least 500 plus years after the death of Jesus. Of course, he's the leader from the last religion we studied. And if you think about the period of time in which he emerged, this was the Arabian Peninsula, which was multi-religious, but also a cultural and economic trading center. So Jewish and Christian ideas circulated among indigenous polytheistic, many god traditions. So Islam doesn't somehow emerge in a vacuum. As we'll see, for example, when Muhammad began to say that Allah would raise people up and have a resurrection, he was laughed at because that was just something that people didn't think was possible within the religious traditions that they had, of course, outside of Judaism and Christianity. So I think that's fascinating when we think about this. It's not somehow he just popped out of nowhere. So there's a historical contrast with Christianity. Certainly there are similarities. And in the Quran, Christians and Jews are called the people of the book. But here's the difference. As we saw in the early centuries of Christianity, Christian community and communities did not have political power. They were a small part of the Roman Empire, of that part of that part of the ancient world. And Muhammad brings together both religious leadership with military and political leadership. He's sort of a cross between Constantine, Paul in some ways, the apostle, and Jesus all at the same time. Let's think again about what happened from 312 to 570. This is a review of where we ended with Christianity. In 70 of the Common Era, Rabbinic Judaism expands throughout the diaspora, throughout this area of the ancient Near East and around the Mediterranean. In 330, Constantine moves the capital to Constantinople. And you can see this is the Byzantine Empire under Justinian in the 6th century, the 500s. So with the center being Constantinople, Rome was sacked in 410, and then the Western Roman Empire fell in 476, as did the Eastern Roman Empire in 1453 to Islamic invaders. We'll get to that a little bit later. Around this period in the 7th century, the 600s, there was a Sasanian Empire which ruled this area from about 224 to 651 of the Common Era. It's not an empire we hear a lot about today, which is fascinating. You can see the map again and the different empires that were existing in the time. This empire was largely Persian, with the capital, Persian meaning largely what we think of as Iranian today, with the capital near Baghdad. Of course, that would not be Iran today, but anyway, it was expanding. And we'll see how important the Persian Empire is in the expanse of Islam later. At any rate, this was primarily the Zoroastrian religion, which was monotheistic. There are still some Zoroastrians today, but even though it's 3,500 years old, it's largely faded out, which is fascinating when you think about, in order to include the great religions, meaning the large religious traditions, world religions of today that are monotheistic, we do not include Zoroastrianism. As I mentioned, there was also polytheism and the presence of Jews and Christians in Arabia. There's also an ongoing warfare over Byzantine or the Roman Empire from that area. So there was already some tension, and there was in the Eastern Roman Empire, just a resistance to expansion from this part of the world from Arabia. The world into which Muhammad was born is described by subsequent Muslims in a single word: ignorant. So writes Houston Smith, and he continues. Life under the conditions of the desert had never been serene. People felt almost no obligation to anyone outside their tribes. Scarcity of material goods made brigandage, that is, robbery, a regional institution and the proof of virility. In the 6th century, political deadlock and the collapse of the magistrate in the leading city of Mecca aggravated this generally chaotic situation. Drunken orgies were commonplace and the gaming impulse uncontrolled. The prevailing religion watched from the sidelines, providing no check. Best described as an animistic polytheism, it peopled the sandy wastes with the beastly sprites called jinn or demons, fantastic personifications of desert terrors that inspired neither exalted sentiments nor moral restraint. The times, as Smith concludes, called for a deliverer. Into that void, into that time at least, comes Muhammad, who is seen by Muslims as God's messenger or prophet. He is in fact the seal of the prophets, the final prophet, born Muhammad Ibn, that is son of Abdallah. His father Abdallah died soon after his son's birth. At 6, he lost his mother and then grandfather at 8. He was taken in by his uncle Abu Talib. So you'll see, and perhaps you already know this, that Islam has this deep sense of concern for the outcast, for the orphan. Obviously, this comes from Muhammad's life, and you also see the importance of Abu Talib on the early Muslim movement. Muhammad's early life was as a shepherd and a caravan attendant. At age 25, he married a rich widow, Khadija, who was 15 years his senior. She had 6 children, all of whom died very young except Fatima, their beloved daughter. Muhammad went on to marry 11 wives after Khadija's death and had 2 concubines in his life. And it's important to note, as I continue, that most of what we know about Muhammad's life is based on a biography written by Ibn Ishaq from 704 to 768, so almost 100 years after Muhammad's death. So if there's a problem finding the historical Jesus, and also, by the way, the historical Buddha, there's also some questions about the historical Muhammad, as it were. The Desert Jinn. Let's go back to them just for a moment as we think about the rise of what Muhammad hears for his first revelation. The Desert Jinn, Houston Smith continues to write, were irrelevant to his quest, to Muhammad's quest, but one deity was not, the name Allah. He was worshipped by the Meccans not only as the one only God, but not as the only God. Correct that. Not as the only God, but as an impressive one nonetheless. Creator, supreme provider, and determiner of humane destiny. He was capable of inspired, authentic religious feeling and genuine devotion. Certain contemplatives of the time, called Hanifs, worshipped Allah exclusively, and Muhammad was one of their number. So in 610, Muhammad, at the age of 40, goes up into the cave and started to receive his revelation. Here it is from the Quran, chapter 96, 1 through 3. On that first night of power, as Muhammad lay on the floor of this cave, his mind locked in deep contemplation, there came to him an angel in the form of a man. The angel said to him, "Proclaim!" And he said, "I am not a proclaimer." Whereupon, as Muhammad was himself to report, the angel took me and whelmed me in his embrace until he had reached the limit of my endurance. Then he released me and said, "Proclaim!" Again I said, "I am not a proclaimer." And again he whelmed me in his embrace. When again he had reached the limit of my endurance, he said, "Proclaim!" And when I again protested, he whelmed me for a third time, this time saying, "Proclaim in the name of the Lord who created created man from a clot of blood. Proclaim your Lord is the most generous, who teaches by the pen, teaches man what he knows not. Aroused from his trance, Muhammad felt as if the words he had heard had been branded on his soul, again from Houston Smith. Terrified, he rushed home and fell into paroxysms. Coming to himself, he told Khadijah that he'd become either a prophet or one possessed mad. At first, she resisted this disjunction, but on hearing his full story, she became his first convert, which Muslims often remark in itself speaks well for its authenticity. For if anyone understands a man's true character, it is his wife. Rejoice, O dear husband, and be of good cheer, she said. You will be the prophet to this people.